In the depths of libraries, where candles cast dancing shadows on ancient frescoes, in workshops imbued with the scents of oils, paints, and stone, a new era was born. It was called by many names: the Age of Light, the Time of Awakening, the Dawn of Humanity, but most often by a single word that still resonates as a call to something sublime and beautiful: the Renaissance. The word Renaissance has its roots in the French language, where Renaissance means rebirth. In Italian, the language of the land where this era originated, it is Rinascimento, carrying the same meaning: a return to life, renewal, resurrection. In the Russian language, the Renaissance era seems to acquire even more warmth. In this phrase, one can hear the breath of spring, the birth of new shoots from old roots, tentative steps after a long sleep. So, what exactly was being reborn in those times? What did humanity seem to find again, like a lost treasure? The answer is simple, yet profound: the human being, their mind, their body, their dignity, their creativity, their view of the world and of themselves. For centuries during the Middle Ages, Europe existed in a world where the human personality often took a back seat to the eternal laws of religion. Art was symbolic, strictly canonical. Philosophy was subordinate to theology. Science was limited by dogma, but this was more like waiting than silence, like earth covered in ice where seeds are ripening, ready to sprout. Humanity held within itself the seeds of a new perspective on the world. And in the X century, in Italian cities, these seeds began to break through. The Renaissance era marked Europe's return to the origins of antiquity, to the great teachings of Plato and Aristotle, to the ideals of harmony embodied in Greek sculpture, to architectural forms characterized by proportion and grace, to the Latin language, poetic art, and the principles of Roman law. However, this was not mere copying. The Renaissance was a profound reinterpretation of the ancient heritage. Renaissance figures sought not merely to revive ancient culture, but to infuse it with new life, uniting the wisdom of the past with contemporary trends. At the center of this new worldview was the human being. Humanitas, or humanity, became the key concept of the era, from which humanism later emerged. Renaissance humanists asserted that the human being is not merely a creation of God, but a rational and free being, possessing the capacity for knowledge, creativity, and self-improvement. It was during this era that portraits flourished, reflecting individuality. Treatises on human nature appeared, the first autobiographies emerged, and a deep interest in the inner world and the human body became apparent. Art moved beyond the confines of church canons. Artists began to depict not only saints, but also secular heroes, mythological scenes, landscapes, and nudes. Music acquired depth and secular beauty. Architecture once again turned to columns, arches, and domes inspired by ancient models. Science took its first steps toward modern thinking. The names of Galileo, Bruno, and Copernicus became symbols of intellectual courage and innovation. The Renaissance era is not merely a historical period, it is a profound transformation of consciousness, an evolution of worldview. It is a revolutionary, albeit gradual, shift in the perception of surrounding reality. In the Renaissance era, nature appeared not only as a backdrop for biblical stories, but also as an object of admiration and scientific study. The earth ceased to be the immutable center of the universe. Reason and faith were no longer antagonists, but allies in the pursuit of truth. Creativity became not merely a whim, but a way of comprehending higher meanings. The human being, in turn, was reinterpreted not as a sinner, desperately seeking redemption, but as a creator in whom the spark of the divine origin burns. This period, spanning 2 centuries, from the X to the 16th century, originated in the heart of Italy, in Tuscany, in Florence. From there, like light, it spread throughout Europe, reaching Rome and Milan, penetrating France, the Netherlands, Germany, and England. In each country, the Renaissance acquired its own unique features and characteristics, but everywhere it carried a unified idea. In every human being, there is an inner light that deserves recognition and expression. The Renaissance is a turning point in history, when history becomes aware of itself. People began to painstakingly collect ancient manuscripts, eagerly study the past, meticulously describe the present, and construct hypotheses about the future. For the first time in a long time, the human being felt not like a prisoner of an eternal cycle, but as a participant in a historical process that can be understood, changed, and directed in the right direction. When we turn to the Renaissance era, images of brilliant artists such as Leonardo da Vinci, Raphael, and Michelangelo come to our minds. We admire the grandeur of the architecture of St. Peter's Basilica, listen to music filled with light, and immerse ourselves in the depth of thought of the humanists. But behind this magnificence lies a quiet miracle. Humanity seems to be falling in love with life all over again. And therein lies the special charm of the Renaissance. After all, we too live in an era that strives for a new round of development, technological, spiritual, and cultural. And perhaps, reflecting on this period, everyone will feel in themselves echoes of that spark, the interest and inspiration that drove the heroes of a distant era, and feel a gentle touch to something great. In places where the rustle of ancient manuscripts intertwined with the breath of the wind, where majestic colonnades guarded the silent faces of ancient gods, and the streets breathed the aromas of leather, exquisite wine, and fresh paints, the countdown to a new era began. To comprehend the origins of the Renaissance, it is necessary to turn to the era that preceded it, the Middle Ages. Often this period is presented as a time of darkness and ignorance, when scientific knowledge was suppressed by religious dogmas and cultural life was limited to the walls of monasteries. However, such a view is overly simplistic. The Middle Ages were an era of profound philosophical inquiry, the construction of majestic Gothic cathedrals, the development of philosophical thought, and the establishment of the first universities. Nevertheless, by the 14th century, signs of decline began to appear in the foundations of the medieval world. The reasons for this were diverse: devastating epidemics of plague that claimed the lives of millions of people, the crisis of the feudal system, the loosening of traditional power structures, and the growth of cities. The old order began to lose its stability, and such turning points, as is known, give rise not only to fear and confusion, but also to hope for change. It was in this difficult period, marked by pain and loss, that the first shoots of what would later be called the Renaissance were born. Italy became the cradle of the new era. Why this country in particular? In the 14th and 15th centuries, the Italian lands were a motley picture of city-states, independent republics, and principalities: Florence, Venice, Milan, Genoa, Rome, Siena, Bologna. In each of these centers, its own unique life was seething, its own politics were being conducted, trade flourished, wars flared up, and ambitions were realized. Unlike France or England, there was no single centralized government here. Instead, there was diversity, fierce competition, a desire for excellence, and a thirst for self-expression. And, as is often the case, culture reached its peak precisely where there was movement, an active exchange of ideas, and freedom of thought. Secondly, the land of Italy carefully preserved tangible evidence of the bygone era of ancient Rome: the majestic ruins of forums, statues frozen in time, monumental columns, and grandiose amphitheaters. All these silent monuments served as a constant reminder of the former greatness of a bygone civilization that once conquered the world. However, ancient manuscripts were of particular importance, priceless texts that were reverently preserved within the walls of monasteries and private collections, gradually returning to life thanks to the painstaking work of scribes and researchers. Thirdly, Italy played the role of a lively trading crossroads, connecting east and west. Through the thriving Venetian and Genoese ports, caravans and ships loaded with various goods, new ideas, and people eager for discovery flowed in an endless stream. Merchants returned home not only with exotic silks and fragrant spices, but also with precious books, knowledge, and amazing stories heard in distant lands. This continuous contact with Byzantium, the mysterious Arab world, and the distant East played a huge role in cultural exchange. It was Arab scholars who preserved and multiplied the works of the great thinkers of antiquity, such as Aristotle, Euclid, and Galen. And now these invaluable texts were gradually returning to Europe, where they were translated from Arabic first into Latin, and then into vernacular languages, opening up new horizons for European scholars. In addition, in 1453, the tragic fall of the Byzantine state occurred, which led to a mass exodus of refugees to Italy, bringing with them a new wave of ancient knowledge. In Constantinople, the capital of Byzantium, the works of ancient philosophers and poets had been carefully preserved for many centuries, and now these priceless texts were in the hands of educated Florentines, Venetians, and Milanese, becoming fertile ground for the emergence of new ideas and bold concepts. During the Italian Renaissance, not only literature flourished, but also the financial sphere, which also had a significant impact on the formation of a new type of thinking. It was on Italian soil that the first banking institutions, financial institutions, and trade and financial houses were established, providing wealthy families not only with economic opportunities, but also with a desire for power and self-expression. The culmination of this process was the rise of the Medici family, Florentine. Bankers who transformed from wealthy entrepreneurs into generous patrons of the arts, science, and architecture. They erected libraries, attracted talented artists, and supported philosophers, setting the tone for the era. Such examples were numerous, and a new phenomenon emerged in society: patronage. Art and knowledge ceased to be exclusively part of religious service, transforming into a means of demonstrating status, taste, and influence. Picturesque canvases, sculptural compositions, and architectural structures became symbols of secular grandeur, reflecting a new Renaissance worldview. It is worth emphasizing that the Renaissance did not arise instantly, like a sudden flash. It was a gradual awakening, a complex mosaic of changes that came together piece by piece. One of the first outstanding artists to foreshadow the Renaissance was Giotto di Bondone. Living at the turn of the 13th and 15th centuries, he began to restore volume to bodies, emotions to faces, and depth to space. His frescoes, although retaining the medieval spirit, already bore the imprint of novelty and heralded the onset of a new era. Universities such as Bologna, Padua, and Salerno played a primary role in the era of change. It was within their walls that jurisprudence, medicine, and philosophy flourished, giving rise to questions and provoking intellectual battles. The university environment became the fertile ground on which the seeds of humanism and innovative scientific approaches sprouted. However, the key moment in the formation of the Renaissance was a radically changed view of man. If the medieval paradigm presented man as a weak and sinful creature, wholly dependent on divine grace, the Renaissance man, on the contrary, appeared bold, inquisitive, and gifted. He was seen not merely as a creation, but as a being capable of comprehending the harmony of the universe. A special role in this context was played by the philosophy of Plato, which experienced its second birth in the works of 15th century thinkers. Platonism, with its idea of perfect forms, the soul striving for the beautiful and inner light, became the spiritual foundation of humanism. Circles of thinkers and philosophical academies arose, where they enthusiastically studied not only the works of Aristotle and Plato, but also the works of Seneca, Cicero, Ovid, and Plutarch, discovering a treasury of ancient wisdom. the erasure of old boundaries, the enrichment of knowledge, the free atmosphere of cities, the prosperity of the merchant class, the interest in the classical heritage and philosophical quests, all of this together created a favorable ground for the flourishing of art, science, and thought. Where new ideas are born, there is always hope. Europe did not yet suspect that treatises capable of turning the perception of the world upside down would soon appear within the walls of monasteries, that images that still evoke awe would arise in art workshops, that cathedral domes would soar upwards, and that music would penetrate the depths of the soul. But all this was already ripening. Everything was just beginning. Thus, the Renaissance was born. Not a sudden flash, but a slow dawn gradually coloring the sky. Sometimes history is made not only by weapons and speeches, but also by the brush of an artist, the ring of a gold coin, the lines of a manuscript. In the shadow of great creators, there were almost always those who believed in them. If the Renaissance is an era of flourishing art, science, architecture, and philosophy, then its breeding ground was the people who supported, inspired, and financed this flourishing. Without their support, perhaps Leonardo da Vinci would not have revealed his genius, and Michelangelo would have remained an unknown youth with a chisel in his hands. These people, patrons, merchants, bankers, rulers, and even church figures driven by pride, refined taste, and a desire to leave their mark on history, became patrons of the new culture. But who were these people and what motivated them? The Medici dynasty, the rulers of Florence, and generous patrons of art, their name is inextricably linked with the Renaissance. The rise of this Florentine family began small, with the apothecary business, which is reflected in their surname, because Medici means doctors. However, after a thorny path, they transformed into one of the most influential banking dynasties in Europe. The Medici Bank spread its branches in Rome, London, Bruges, Paris, Milan, and achieved such prosperity that even the papal throne resorted to their services. A key figure of the Renaissance was Cosimo the Elder, who was awarded the honorary title Pater Patriae, Father of the Fatherland. He skillfully ruled Florence from the shadows, formally remaining a simple citizen, but actually directing the city's policy with amazing dexterity. His palace, the richest libraries, and the philosophical circle became a real stronghold of humanism. Cosimo collected ancient manuscripts, attracted copyists and translators to work, creating priceless collections. It was under his rule that the tradition of patronage of artists and architects originated in Florence, becoming the city's hallmark. The next prominent patron was Cosimo's grandson, Lorenzo the Magnificent, whose name rightly became a symbol of the golden age of Florence. He himself was a talented poet, deeply versed in philosophy, participated in scientific discussions, and, most importantly, provided generous support to talented individuals. It was under Lorenzo's patronage that geniuses such as Botticelli, Poliziano, Michelangelo, Ficino, and Pico della Mirandola flourished. Lorenzo not only allocated funds, but also created a special atmosphere in which talents blossomed. He was a true embodiment of the spirit of the Renaissance, secular, refined, educated, and passionately fond of art. The Renaissance era presented the world with an astonishing phenomenon. Roman popes, traditionally perceived as spiritual leaders, transformed into zealous patrons of the arts, and the Vatican became a veritable workshop of genius. Starting with Nicholas V and continuing through Leo X, the pontiffs launched an unprecedented campaign to create aesthetic splendor. They initiated a massive reconstruction of the Vatican, engaging the most talented artists and architects, forming the richest collections of artworks, and opening libraries that became centers of attraction for scholars and humanists. It was thanks to their generous patronage that the world saw the frescoes of the Sistine Chapel, the majestic St. Peter's Basilica, the immortal canvases of Raphael, and the monumental frescoes of Michelangelo. Pope Julius II, who went down in history as the warrior pontiff, was distinguished by his particular scope and ambition in his artistic endeavors. He not only commissioned Michelangelo to create his own tomb, but also persuaded him to undertake the painting of the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Despite the fact that Michelangelo considered himself primarily a sculptor, he boldly took on this grandiose project, bringing to life one of the most outstanding masterpieces in the history of human civilization. However, the Renaissance was not limited to Rome and Florence alone. Secular rulers such as dukes, marquises, and kings also contributed to the development of art and culture. In Milan, under the patronage of the Sforza dynasty, Leonardo da Vinci created his famous frescoes. In Urbino, Duke Federico da Montefeltro transformed his castle into a thriving center of intellectual life, attracting philosophers and artists from all over Italy. Mantua, thanks to the enlightened Isabella d'Este, became a haven for poets, musicians, and painters. Ferrara, Naples, Siena, and Venice. Each city strived to acquire its unique face, cultivating its own masters and creating a unique atmosphere of creativity. Outside of Italy, the initiative was picked up by the French monarchs, enchanted by the magnificence of the Renaissance. Francis III did the honor of inviting Leonardo da Vinci himself to his court. It was in France that this titan of thought and brush completed his life's journey, surrounded by worldwide fame and honor. But what drove these rulers? Was their patronage dictated solely by a disinterested love of art? Not quite. Patronage in the Renaissance era represented a complex alliance of aesthetic ideals, political power, and ideological influence. Supporting artists and poets served as a powerful means to immortalize one's name in history, demonstrate unlimited power, and create an image that would outlive the ages. Portrait galleries, majestic frescoes, exquisite marble sarcophagi, family churches with private chapels, all this was not only an expression of refined taste, but also an effective tool for political influence and the glorification of one's own person. Figures of the Renaissance deeply understood that art is a universal language, capable of transcending time and speaking to posterity. Their ambitions extended far beyond earthly life. They strived for immortality in the memory of mankind. However, among the political calculations and vain aspirations, there was undoubtedly a genuine adoration of beauty. Many patrons harbored a sincere love for music, poetry, and painting. They sought in art a deep meaning, harmony, and a source of inspiration for their own achievements. And this is their exceptional role in history. They did not just acquire masterpieces for fabulous money. They created a favorable environment in which genius could be born, strengthen, and unlock its inexhaustible potential. In the Renaissance era, urban centers were transformed, ceasing to be merely administrative units, and acquired unique features, like living beings with their own character and individuality. Florence, for example, exuded sophistication and a penchant for philosophical reflections, while Milan impressed with its cold calculation and engineering genius. Rome, in turn, demonstrated grandeur and insatiable ambition. Each city spoke its own unique language, becoming a kind of stage for the unfolding drama of a new culture. On the bustling streets, heated debates were held about the works of Plato and Aristotle. In workshops, they tirelessly experimented with new pigments and painting techniques. In taverns, they discussed the latest scientific treatises, and in palaces, they arranged luxurious musical evenings. This was a time of fervent discussions, the discovery of new talents, and an unyielding thirst for self-expression. Spiritus Tempus, the spirit of the age, was saturated with energy and a premonition of change. People felt they were at the epicenter of a new era. in the very heart of a world being born. This sensation served as a powerful stimulus for creativity. Their hands touched stone and canvas, but these touches gave birth to something more than just a work of art. What had slumbered for centuries in the depths of the human soul was awakening and looking at the world through eyes that mingled the divine and the human. At the very center of the Renaissance, as if in the focus of a lens, was art. It served both as a mirror reflecting the era and as a guide directing its development. Through the brush, through marble, through the play of light and shadow, the masters of the Renaissance did not simply depict the surrounding reality, they actively shaped it. They created new ideals of beauty, awakened in people a sense of harmony, and for the first time in centuries, restored to man his true form. The art of the Middle Ages developed according to its own special canons, where the symbol was paramount, rather than the pursuit of a realistic depiction of corporeality. The faces of the characters appeared as simplified schemes. The bodies seemed flat, and the perspective was conditional. However, during the Renaissance, artists seemed to rediscover the world of human flesh and the surrounding nature. They remembered that a person has muscles, skin, bones, an expressive gaze, and characteristic gestures. They realized that nature is filled with air, volume, movement, and that light has a specific direction. Like newborns opening their eyes for the first time, the masters of the Renaissance enthusiastically began to study this world anew. Giotto di Bondone, a Florentine painter who lived at the turn of the 13th and 14th centuries, became the harbinger of this awakening of corporeality. His frescoes, especially those that adorn the Scrovegni Chapel in Padua, were the first to present figures with volume and weight. Giotto's characters stood firmly on the ground, cast shadows, and expressed a wide range of emotions. This was a bold innovation, almost audacity, by the standards of that time. Giotto returned corporeality to man, but not crude or mundane, but spiritualized and elevated. And although his style did not yet fully utilize all the achievements of perspective, he pointed out a new direction in art. His works conveyed the feeling that man is not just an element of a theological scheme, but a being endowed with feelings and physical form. In the 15th century, the Renaissance reached its peak in Florence. One of its most prominent representatives was Sandro Botticelli. His canvases, imbued with subtlety, poetry, and mythological inspiration, became a true symbol of the early Renaissance. In the famous Birth of Venus, the viewer sees not just a naked goddess, but an embodiment of the very idea of beauty, fragile, airy, and almost unreal. His Primavera is not just an illustration of a calendar plot, but an allegory of life, the awakening of inner energy and flowering. The lines of his paintings are filled with music, and the faces of the characters express an inexpressible longing. Botticelli did not just paint the body, he painted the soul enclosed in a bodily shell. Leonardo da Vinci, a titan of the Renaissance, whose name is inextricably linked with the flourishing of genius and the comprehensive development of personality. To call him simply a painter would be a gross oversimplification, because he was a true universal genius whose interests encompassed anatomy, engineering, architecture, music, philosophy, and invention. And all these facets of his talent were reflected in his paintings. Take, for example, the famous Last Supper. It is not just a masterpiece of composition, but also a deep psychological study of human nature. Every movement of the apostles captured in the fresco is filled with inner tension, and each pose reveals the unique character of the person. Or Mona Lisa, the eternally enigmatic Lisa del Giocondo, whose gaze and subtle smile have become a symbol of an unsolved mystery. There is no ostentatious luxury or deliberate symbols in her image, but there is an inexplicable attractiveness, as if she is a reflection of the very essence of being. Leonardo meticulously studied anatomy, performing dissections of bodies and drawing in detail the muscles, tendons, and heart valves. His anatomical sketches are a unique combination of scientific accuracy and artistic genius. He sought to comprehend the essence of the movement of life in all its manifestations, in the human body, in the swirls of water, in the flight of a bird. That is why his painting still seems alive, breathing, capable of touching the hearts of viewers through the ages. Michelangelo Buonarroti, a genius who managed to breathe life into cold marble. Unlike Leonardo da Vinci, who strived for comprehensive knowledge and refinement, Michelangelo was an artist endowed with fierce power. First of all, he was a sculptor, but his talent also manifested itself vividly in painting. His brush and chisel acted like a lightning strike, not simply copying reality, but creating a completely new universe. His David is not just a character from the Bible, it's a symbol of freedom, indomitable strength, and unwavering human will. Michelangelo's Pietà is not merely an image of the grieving Madonna holding her son's body. It's an embodiment of profound sorrow, pierced by a light of hope. And his frescoes adorning the Sistine Chapel, especially the famous scene of the creation of Adam, have become, without exaggeration, one of the most recognizable compositions in the history of human civilization. Michelangelo felt no fear in depicting the human form. His characters are mighty, perfectly formed, almost superhuman beings. He sincerely believed that the beauty of the human body reflects divine harmony. The master said he was merely releasing the figure trapped in the stone, as if he could see through the marble. Raphael Santi, on the other hand, strived for harmony between the celestial and the terrestrial. If Michelangelo embodied strength and Leonardo thought, Raphael was the embodiment of harmony. His paintings are filled with light, tranquility, and perfect symmetry. Raphael's Madonnas are tender, humane, and almost earthly images, full of heavenly grace. His frescoes in the Vatican, especially the School of Athens, became a true apotheosis of the Renaissance era, uniting ancient heritage, Christian ideals, philosophy, and art in a single composition. Raphael was not granted a long life, but his work became a benchmark for many generations of artists. His art lacked Leonardo's turbulent passions and Michelangelo's indomitable fury, but it possessed perfect music of forms and feelings. What united these outstanding creators? They were not just skilled artisans, but intellectuals armed with a brush and chisel. Their minds were occupied with the works of Plato, discussions about human anatomy, and debates about the nature of the soul. They sought not just external representation, but penetration into the very essence of things. Each, in their own way, embodied the key principle of the Renaissance. The human being deserves to be understood and represented in all their fullness, with all their complexities, contradictions, and beauty. Their workshops turned into real laboratories. Paintings became unique books, and work served not just as decoration, but as a reason for deep reflection, contemplation, and admiration. Why is this so important to us today? Even now, centuries later, when we contemplate the Mona Lisa or Spring, when we stand before David or under the vaults of the Sistine Chapel, we experience the same feeling as the contemporaries of these geniuses, awe before the power of the human mind. We see not just paints, marble, or fabric, but feel a touch of something eternal. Renaissance artists gave the world a new vision. They taught us to perceive the human being not as a sinner or a figure within the framework of dogmatic ideas, but as a whole world, full of mysteries and possibilities. They showed that within each of us are the proportions of a cathedral, the music of the heavens, the laws of physics, and the poetry of myths. And this is the main gift of the art of that era. It awakened not just a sense of beauty, but a profound sense of life. In the beginning, there was the Word, but for its immortality, reliable preservation was required. And so human genius found a way to give words wings so they could freely soar over the world. If art touched the senses and physical nature, then printing awakened the intellect. This discovery became a turning point in history, like the explosion of a supernova in the night darkness. Suddenly, irrevocably, dazzlingly, it gave the opportunity for thoughts to sound, preserved them for posterity, multiplied their number, and sent them on a journey around the world. This amazing journey began in the modest workshop of a craftsman who managed to combine metal, paper, and an innovative idea. The name of Johannes Gutenberg is shrouded in silence. Information about his life is extremely scarce. It is known that this German inventor lived in Mainz in the 15th century. However, his invention became one of the most significant revolutions in the history of human culture. Around the 1440s, he developed the first European system of movable type, that is, individual metal letters suitable for multiple uses. He created special ink resistant to printing. He improved the printing press and launched the first machine in history capable of reproducing texts with high speed, accuracy, and in large quantities. In 1405, the world saw a creation that became a milestone in human history, the Bible, published by Johannes Gutenberg and typeset in 42 lines per page. This monumental work, known today as the Gutenberg Bible, was not just a religious text, but a true herald of a new era, an era of accessible knowledge. Thanks to the ingenious combination of paper, specially developed ink, and metal type, information ceased to be the domain of the elite. Before the invention of the printing press, each book was a unique artifact, meticulously transcribed by hand by monastic scribes. This laborious process took years and was not without errors and inconsistencies. Books were incredibly rare and expensive, a luxury item of almost magical value. They were kept like treasures in monasteries, castles, and universities, remaining inaccessible to most people. However, with the advent of the printing press, the situation changed dramatically. Hundreds and then thousands of copies of books began to triumphantly march across cities, countries, and continents. Books seemed to come alive, gaining the ability to overcome vast distances and outlive centuries. The invention of the printing press became the impetus that gave a powerful impulse to the development of the Renaissance. Within a few decades, printing houses began to spring up throughout Europe, like mushrooms after rain. In Venice, Florence, Paris, London, and Nuremberg, printing became a raging torrent. What was printed first? Of course, the ancient classics, the revival of which humanists so aspired to, the works of Cicero, Plato, Aristotle, and Ovid. They did not forget about theology, medicine, astronomy, mathematics, geography, and travel notes, satisfying the thirst for knowledge and discovery that gripped European society. With the advent of the printing press, the world saw a flowering of literature. Dictionaries, textbooks, almanacs and treatises, plays and poems filled the shelves of bookstores. A unified language of knowledge began to form, open not only to the select few, but to all who were literate. The printed book revolutionized society, turning information from a precious rarity into a commonplace occurrence. If previously knowledge was transmitted slowly, like a relay race from mouth to mouth, from one parchment to another, now every thought could be instantly disseminated, generating discussions and new ideas. This was the beginning of an information revolution that changed not only the speed of knowledge dissemination, but also the very nature of humanity. People began to read, think, and remember in new ways. In the culture of oral tradition, where memorization played a key role, the opportunity arose to reread, compare, and analyze texts. The book ceased to be the sole source of wisdom, becoming part of an extensive library, a complex system of knowledge. The phenomenon of quiet, solitary reading arose when a person remained alone with the text, immersed in the intimate process of understanding away from the crowd, sermons, and loud recitations. Reading has the amazing ability to transform our consciousness, turning into a genuine practice of achieving inner freedom. The book opens doors to unexplored worlds, offers a unique opportunity to meet authors whose voices were previously inaccessible, and, most importantly, allows us to form our own independent point of view on what is happening. The alliance of printing and science acquired special significance, becoming a catalyst for progress. Before the invention of the printing press, scientific discoveries were often forgotten, lost in the labyrinths of time, and did not reach the attention of other scientists. Now, every bold hypothesis, every carefully executed drawing, every complex formula could be easily reproduced, subjected to thorough verification, and passed down from generation to generation. This became a solid foundation for the formation of the scientific method, based on the principles of verification, comparison, and repeatability of results. It was thanks to the printed word that Europe was able to create an extensive scientific network, which became the forerunner of modern scientific journals, conferences, and generally accepted standards. The discovery of Copernicus, detailed maps of America, revolutionary works on medicine and astronomy, all this spread around the world with unprecedented speed, erasing borders and uniting minds. The first encyclopedias appeared, collections of works, introductory courses in various scientific disciplines designed to systematize knowledge and make it accessible to the general public. Scientists began to actively refer to each other's works, exchange ideas, and jointly move towards new discoveries. Thus, a scientific community was gradually formed, united by a common goal, the knowledge of truth. Humanity, armed with the printed word, began its journey from the simple accumulation of knowledge to its deep systematization and understanding. But along with the triumph of the printing press, an ominous premonition arose. After all, knowledge, in its essence, is a powerful force, and any force, as history shows, invariably generates a desire to curb and subordinate it. Church hierarchs, monarchs, and inquisitors quickly realized the destructive power of the printed word, capable of sowing discord and undermining foundations. In response, censorship arises, a sinister institution designed to control the dissemination of ideas. Sinister lists of banned literature are compiled, and printing houses are subjected to rigorous checks, like hotbeds of heresy. Some books, like dangerous artifacts, were burned, and their creators were persecuted as if they were criminals. However, stopping the triumphant march of progress proved impossible. Once a thought took material form, embodied in ink and paper, it became virtually invulnerable, like a genie released from a bottle. It was truly a great victory for the human spirit, a triumph of reason over ignorance. With the invention of printing, an era began that we now call modernity, the dawn of a new age. It did not yet know the wonders of electricity, fast cars, or omnipotent computers, but it had already grasped the main thing: how to make thought universal, how to spread knowledge to all corners of the world, how to bring each person closer to the light of truth. Humanists, brilliant artists, and outstanding scientists found in the book a faithful ally, a reliable guide to their ideas. The book has turned from a simple means of transmitting information into a priceless repository of human memory, a treasury of wisdom accumulated over the centuries. We still live today using this priceless heritage as if breathing the air of freedom. We still read fascinating books, make important notes, and share our thoughts with others, as if we are keeping the fire of knowledge burning. And it is quite possible that as you fall asleep to the soothing whisper of this lecture, in the depths of your memory are born your own words, vivid images, and plots of future books ready to break free. In the distant past, when the night sky was a source of mysticism and worship, humanity began to show curiosity, arising not from rebellion, but from a deep desire for knowledge. The desire to understand the universe and not blindly believe in established dogmas became the starting point for great discoveries, and the universe, as if responding to this sincere call, began to reveal its innermost secrets. The Renaissance, marked by the flourishing of art and humanistic ideals, also witnessed the awakening of reason. It was a gradual but steady revolt against established ideas, a transition from a world where truth was considered immutable to a world where it needed to be sought, tested, and rediscovered. The Renaissance gave man the courage to independently evaluate the surrounding reality. In that era, science had not yet acquired its modern form. The boundaries between astronomy and astrology, alchemy and chemistry, natural philosophy and physics were blurred. However, it was in this uncertainty, in an atmosphere of creative search and bold hypotheses, that the foundations of the modern scientific picture of the world were laid. Before the Renaissance, the European view of the cosmos was based on the Ptolemaic system developed in the 2nd century AD. In this model, the Earth occupied a central position, remaining motionless, while the sun, moon, and planets revolved around it, fixed on transparent spheres, nested one inside the other. This concept harmoniously combined with Christian theology, placing man at the center of the universe and subordinating everything else to his needs. The universe seemed predictable, eternal, and perfect. However, this poetic picture of the world had its drawbacks. Observations of the movement of the planets increasingly diverged from theoretical calculations, generating doubts and contradictions, which gradually increased, like the first rumbles of thunder before an approaching storm. In an era of deep reflection and scientific inquiry, the Polish astronomer Nicholas Copernicus, who also held the dignity of canon, first dared to express an idea that could overturn established ideas about the universe. He asked a question that sounded like a quiet challenge. What if the Earth is not the center of the universe? What if the sun occupies this central place and our planet is just one of many orbiting it? In 1543, the year of his death, Copernicus presented to the world his magnum opus, a work entitled On the Revolutions of the Heavenly Spheres, where he detailed his heliocentric model. It was a real revolution in science, presented, however, in a delicate form. Copernicus did not seek open conflict with the Church. He was not a rebel, but at the very core of his theory contained a powerful explosive potential, capable of shifting the center of the universe from man to a star. And although his work was not immediately banned, it sowed the seed of doubt in the minds of contemporaries and future generations. For the first time, humanity allowed the thought that it is not the axis of the universe, but only a part of something much larger and more majestic. Copernicus's followers, inspired by his ideas, went even further in their research. One of them was Galileo Galilei, an Italian scientist whose name has become a symbol of scientific courage and fearlessness. He was not only an outstanding astronomer, but also a talented physicist, mathematician, engineer, and philosopher. Galileo was the first to point a telescope at the heavens not for practical purposes, such as observing sea horizons, but for studying the Moon, Jupiter, and Venus. He saw mountains and craters on the Moon, which refuted the common notion of its perfectly smooth surface. He discovered 4 satellites of Jupiter, which was further proof that not all celestial bodies revolve around the Earth. Observing the phases of Venus, Galileo obtained compelling evidence in favor of Copernicus's heliocentric model. However, Galileo Galilei was not merely an observer of celestial bodies, but a true herald of science, a man who sought to convey his discoveries to the general public. He abandoned academic Latin, preferring to express his thoughts in the vibrant Italian language, which allowed him to reach a much wider audience. Galileo did not simply state facts. He engaged in heated discussions, persuaded, argued, supported his arguments with visual diagrams, and published popular treatises explaining complex scientific concepts in simple and accessible language. As a man of the Gutenberg era, he fully utilized the possibilities of the printing press to ensure that his voice was heard by as many people as possible. Such an active stance, of course, could not but lead to a clash with the powerful forces of the time. In 1633, Galileo was summoned to the court of the Roman Inquisition, where he was forced to renounce his beliefs and admit the fallacy of the heliocentric system of the world. After a humiliating procedure of repentance, he was sentenced to house arrest, spending the rest of his days in confinement. Despite the loneliness and isolation that befell him in his later years, Galileo could rightly believe that his cause was not in vain. Science, having broken free, could no longer be returned to the former framework of scholastic dogmas and medieval prejudices. If Galileo was primarily a physicist and astronomer, a man who relied on observations and experiments, then Giordano Bruno was undoubtedly a poet of the philosophy of the cosmos, a thinker whose ideas were ahead of his time. A native of Naples, he joined the Dominican order, but soon felt confined within the walls of the monastery, his restless mind demanding space and freedom. Even by the standards of the Renaissance, with its cult of free thought and thirst for new knowledge, Bruno's ideas were distinguished by exceptional boldness and audacity. He argued that the universe has no designated center, that the stars we see in the night sky are distant suns around which their own planets revolve, and that life may well exist on these planets. Bruno spoke of the infinity of the universe, of the multiplicity of worlds, of the divine nature of human thought, capable of comprehending the most secret mysteries of the universe. He was convinced that truth cannot be confined to the framework of a single dogma, that it is multifaceted and manifests itself in various forms. Wandering through European lands, engaging in teaching, participating in scientific battles, and creating literary works, he ended his life in 1600 on a pyre in Rome. The formal reason for the execution was accusations of heresy and philosophical deviations from dogma, rather than his astronomical research. The true cause of the tragedy was the audacity of his thought and unwillingness to accept intellectual boundaries. Although the flames of the pyre cut short his earthly existence, echoes of his ideas continued in subsequent centuries. The science of the Renaissance did not limit its interests to the celestial spheres, turning its gaze to the Earth's expanses and the human body. Leonardo da Vinci, seeking to understand the structure of the heart, eyes, and nervous system, created detailed anatomical drawings, resorting to the dissection of corpses. In 1543, simultaneously with the publication of Copernicus's work, Andreas Vesalius presented his work on the structure of the human body to the world, in which he debunked established misconceptions based on the authority of ancient anatomists. At the same time, progress is being made in optics and the study of light. Isaac Newton later continued the development of this direction based on Galileo's experiments, Da Vinci's observations, lens research, and the desire to understand the mechanism of human vision and the reasons for perceiving the world in this way. Mathematics is also experiencing a period of prosperity, marked by the emergence of Cartesian thinking, algebraic methods, and the foundations of mathematical analysis. The foundation for future exact science is being laid, and knowledge begins to acquire a clear structure. In the period preceding the Renaissance, the image of a scientist was associated primarily with monastic life, scholastic studies, and seclusion in libraries. However, the Renaissance marked the emergence of a completely new type of researcher, a person striving for experimentation, study, and observation of nature. Leaving the monastery walls, he went to the forests and fields, rose to the stars to collect data, engage in scientific discussions, create drawings, and conduct measurements. Scientists of that era actively corresponded with each other, exchanging ideas and knowledge. Science was becoming open to all who sought knowledge, which was one of the most significant changes of the time. The Renaissance taught people not just to look, but to see, not just to possess knowledge, but to understand its essence. Science in the Renaissance had a dreamy character, neither denying miracles, nor conflicting with faith, nor claiming to provide a comprehensive explanation of the world. It was driven by a sincere quest, a desire to know and study the structure of the universe with admiration and reverence. It was science born out of a love for truth, not just a desire to control nature. During the Renaissance, science had not yet separated from philosophy, but it was already oriented towards experience, experiment, and reality. The Renaissance revealed to man not only the beauty of the body, the sensuality of music, and the poetry of words, but also the boundless cosmos of the mind, where questions are more important than answers, and the sincerity of the search is valued more than definitive conclusions. Looking into the mirror, it was as if for the first time in many years he had stopped looking for shadows of sin, humiliating shame, or uncomplaining submission. Now his gaze was directed towards the search for meaning, inner light, and spiritual height. And perhaps it was at that moment that he truly saw himself for the first time. The Renaissance brought about a radical change in the perception of man. If in the dark Middle Ages man appeared primarily as a sinful, powerless, and fallen creature desperately in need of salvation, then in the Renaissance a completely different vision opened up before him. Man as a creator, as a deep thinker, as a free and independent individual, as a bearer of reason and beauty. It is important to note that this was not a complete rejection of religion, not at all. Rather, it was a profound reinterpretation of the role of man in the universe, from the image of a helpless grain of sand driven by the wind of fate, to the image of a spark of divine flame enclosed in a mortal body, from a soulless cog in a complex divine plan, to a being capable of awareness, making choices, and creating anew. I am a man, and nothing human is alien to me. This famous phrase of the ancient Roman playwright Terence echoed in the Renaissance with a new, unprecedented force. At the very center of this worldview shift was a concept that we still use today, sometimes without even thinking about its deep origins: humanism. Humanism, derived from the Latin word humanitas, meaning humanity, was neither a rigid ideology, nor a strict system, nor an immutable dogma. It was, above all, a special view of the world in which man was recognized as the main and unconditional value. Humanists did not reject the existence of God, but they firmly believed that the path to understanding the divine lies through a deep understanding of man. They argued that reason, the gift of speech, culture, the ability to do good and create, these are not some random deviations, but the very essence of human nature, its defining characteristics. Humanism originated among talented Italian scholars, poets, and philosophers who began to study ancient texts not as lifeless artifacts of the past, but as a source of living wisdom capable of shedding light on the present. In an era when the horizons of thought were expanding, Renaissance figures rediscovered the greatness of Cicero, Seneca, and Plutarch. In their works, they found not just polished rhetorical art, but echoes of a lost world where the human personality was valued above all else. Francesco Petrarch, a poet and thinker whose work marked the birth of the Renaissance, lived in the 14th century and was the first to understand antiquity not as a period of pagan delusion, but as a lost era of greatness to which it was necessary to return. His pen produced soulful love sonnets and profound philosophical treatises. He corresponded with the classics as if he shared the same era with them. Petrarch aspired to the heights not only figuratively but also literally, ascending mountain peaks to contemplate the beauty of the world and feel its greatness. He believed that spiritual self-improvement was the highest goal of human existence. However, the most vivid expression of the Renaissance ideal came from another outstanding humanist, Giovanni Pico della Mirandola, a young genius whose life, though short, left an indelible mark on history. In 1486, he created a work called Oration on the Dignity of Man, which is often called the Manifesto of the Renaissance. In this text, he presented a dialogue between God and man. God, according to Pico, addresses Adam with the words, "I have endowed you with neither a definite form nor a predetermined fate, so that you yourself, at your own discretion and will, may shape your image. You are free to become like an animal, or to soar to angelic heights. The choice is yours." The Renaissance marked the emergence of bright and bold ideas that revolutionized the understanding of humanity and its place in the world. One such breakthrough was the assertion of boundless individual freedom. According to the thinkers of that time, a person is not a hostage to fate or circumstances. They have the right to choose their own path, to soar to the heights, or fall into the abyss. They are the creator of their own essence, the architect of their own destiny. This was truly a revolutionary theology of freedom, opening up new horizons for humanity. At the same time, another outstanding Renaissance mind, Niccolò Machiavelli, turned his gaze to humanity from a different perspective, from the side of power, social life, and political struggle. In his famous treatise, The Prince, he created the image of a ruler who does not necessarily have to be ideal or virtuous. The main thing for him is effectiveness, the ability to achieve his goals. Machiavelli looked at the world without rose-colored glasses, seeing humanity in all its complexity and contradictions. He recognized that people are capable of both the greatest nobility and vile treachery, of heroism and baseness. And it is in this, according to Machiavelli, that the harsh truth of life, the realism of politics, lies. His ideas provoked a mixed reaction in society. Many perceived them with caution, and Machiavelli's name became synonymous with cunning and immorality. However, in essence, he only sought to see humanity as it really is, without embellishment or illusions. This was his special, harsh, and pragmatic humanism. One only needs to look at the portraits of the Renaissance to feel the changes that had taken place. In these paintings, we see not just types or symbols, not faceless reflections. Before us are living people with their unique facial features, expressions in their eyes, and moods. Each of them possesses their own unique character, their own individuality. The same can be observed in the autobiographies of that time. People begin to write about themselves, for themselves, striving to understand their inner world, to make sense of their life's journey, to conduct self-analysis. This is how the modern concept of I is born, not proud and self-satisfied, but aware of itself, its strengths and weaknesses. People cease to be merely a function, a cog in the system, and become individuals, possessing their own unique inner world. In the Renaissance, along with the flourishing of reason and spirit, thinkers and artists turned their gaze to the human body, reinterpreting its significance. For the first time since ancient times, the nude ceases to be a source of shame and regains its status as a value worthy of admiration. Artists eagerly delve into the study of anatomy, striving to convey the play of muscles, harmonious proportions, and naturalness of movement with maximum accuracy. Sculptors create works in which human flesh appears as a temple of harmony, an embodiment of perfection bestowed by nature. The nude in the Renaissance is not just an object of desire, but a symbol of ideal beauty, a reflection of the divine harmony of the world. It is noteworthy that this perception of physicality did not contradict spiritual quests. Many humanists sincerely believed that the soul is contained within the body, and through contemplation of bodily beauty, one can touch the mysteries of the universe. Moving from the external to the internal, from the divine to the human, from strict formulas to free exploration, the Renaissance becomes an era when humanity becomes not only a favorite subject of art, but also an object of deep research, inexhaustible inspiration, and sincere admiration. People are no longer a mere powerless performer in a divine drama. they become its co-author, the creator of their own destiny. This shift in consciousness was subtle and profound. It was not a rebellion or a denial of spirituality. Rather, it was a return to the awareness of human dignity when people rediscovered the belief that being human is not a curse, but a priceless gift. Within each of us burns a fire capable of illuminating not only our own path, but also the path of others. To be rational, feeling, and striving for knowledge is not a weakness, but the greatest strength bestowed upon humanity. In the Renaissance, like a phoenix from the ashes, the body once again appeared before the eyes of humanity in an aura of harmony, openness, and imperturbable confidence. It was no longer a burden, but was perceived as a true miracle. The greatness of the Renaissance lay not only in the return to ancient philosophical treatises, scientific discoveries, and works of art, but also in the restoration of the body's deserved place in the universe. After centuries when the flesh was considered a source of sinful thoughts, weakness, and temptations, the body regained its status as a miracle of nature, a form in which the spirit dwells. This was not a manifestation of frivolity, licentiousness, or caprice. This became a spiritual reinterpretation of the physical essence of man, a philosophical recognition that man is not only a soul, but also a bodily form, not only a word, but also a gesture, not only thought, but also movement. The body was likened to a temple, an architectural masterpiece, an embodiment of harmony. Let's turn to antiquity and the Middle Ages. In ancient Greece and Rome, the body was celebrated in all its manifestations. It was an object of close study, admiration, and imitation. The naked athlete with his harmonious proportions was an ideal sculptural embodiment. And this was not just aesthetic admiration, but a whole philosophy. The beauty of the body symbolized inner balance, strength of spirit, good health, and virtue. The Middle Ages in Europe were marked by a unique path of development, where Christian asceticism left its mark on the perception of corporeality. The body began to be considered a haven of temptation, a perishable shell, unworthy of special attention. The art of that time reflected this worldview, representing figures in a flat, conditional, and constrained form. Anatomical knowledge practically did not develop, since all attention was focused on the spiritual component, on the invisible and afterlife. However, time moved inexorably forward, and in the 15th or 16th centuries, a new attitude to corporeality was born in Italy. Leonardo da Vinci, an outstanding anatomist, artist, and philosopher of the body, became one of the pioneers of this revolution. His interest in the body was not due to sensual desires, but to a desire for knowledge and deep respect. He performed hundreds of anatomical dissections, carefully studying muscles, tendons, blood vessels, and internal organs. His anatomical drawings are real poetic works, executed with surgical precision and poetic attention to detail. Leonardo da Vinci sought to comprehend the mechanics of human movement, to understand how the arm functions, how a person maintains a vertical position, how the heart is structured, and how blood circulates. His famous Vitruvian Man is not just an artistic image, but a symbol of an entire era. A man inscribed in a circle, and a square appears as the measure of all things, as the center of the universe, and as the embodiment of living geometry. Leonardo da Vinci did not just depict human bodies in his paintings, he saw in them the deepest mysteries of the universe, mathematical harmony, and the perfection of biomechanical principles. He argued that there is not a single detail in the human body created without a specific purpose, thereby emphasizing the functional meaningfulness of each of its parts. In contrast to him, Michelangelo Buonarroti saw in the body something else, the embodiment of the spirit enclosed in a material shell. Michelangelo perceived the body as an unshakable rock, a source of light, and a divine manifestation. If Leonardo was a scientist anatomist striving to understand the structure, then Michelangelo was a sculptor who revived the spirit through the forms of flesh. His works depict titans, celestial beings, and heroes, but at the same time, they remain people. He did not just copy the human figure, but surpassed it, elevating it to the level of the ideal. His David is not just a young man, but an idea of power and unwavering determination embodied in marble. The Sistine Chapel, painted by him, is filled with many bodies that are not abstract symbols. These are living, energetic figures, captured in the dynamics of movement and the perfection of forms. Even Michelangelo's female images resemble athletes, demonstrating strength and endurance. His flesh is always full of vital energy. He was fascinated by the body not out of sensual motives, but for the sake of expressing inner strength and will, embodied in form. During the Renaissance, not only artists showed interest in anatomy. Medical scientists also made a significant contribution to the study of the human body. One of the most outstanding was Andreas Vesalius, the author of De Humani Corporis Fabrica, 1543, dedicated to the structure of the human body. In his work, he refuted many of Galen's misconceptions, presented accurate images of organs, real proportions, and the correct arrangement of bones and muscles. Vesalius's book became a real encyclopedia of corporeality, striking in its accuracy of illustrations. Thanks to his work, man ceased to be an incomprehensible mystery and turned into an object of rational knowledge. This was an important step towards the development of modern medicine. At the same time, Vesalius did not deny the spiritual component of man. He believed that studying the body is serving God, since it is studying his creation. The art of the nude is not a subject for gossip, but a way to achieve spiritual heights. During the Renaissance, for the first time since ancient times, artists were able to openly and without embarrassment depict the naked human body. This was not a bold challenge to society or a provocation, but rather a return to lost harmony. Such outstanding masters as Titian, Giorgione, and Raphael created images of Venuses, Apollos, nymphs, men, and women, presenting them not as objects of desire, but as embodiments of beauty and perfection. Even when erotic undertones were present in their works, they did not deprive the depicted figures of dignity. This is the key point. Renaissance art did not turn flesh into a commodity for sale, but returned to it its sacred meaning, but in a natural, rather than a religious moralizing way. Interest in movement, sport, and gestures also played an important role. Artists and thinkers were fascinated by how a person walks, dances, works, and fights. They dedicated their works to the study of gestures, body language, and athletic harmony. In the Renaissance, ancient gymnastic exercises and practices aimed at developing movement and posture regained popularity. In 15th century Italy, physical culture became an integral part of human education because form is embodied in the body and virtue in form. Even in theater and music, attention began to be paid to corporeality. The actor no longer simply recited the text, but moved in accordance with it, expressing his feelings through the body. The Renaissance was marked not only by the glorification of idealized beauty, but also by close attention to the reality of the human body in all its diversity. Along with images of Apollos and Venuses, artists of that time boldly depicted old age, ailments, and physical suffering, striving not only for perfection, but also for a truthful reflection of life. Even ugliness, which previously only caused ridicule, was now depicted with genuine interest and a desire to understand its nature. The body became an object of careful study, and not an object of condemnation, which was a huge step on the path from shame and prohibitions to conscious attention. Renaissance philosophers argued that man is a microcosm, a small world reflecting the universe. They believed that the human body contains all the elements of the universe: the cycle of planets, the movement of stars, fire, water, air, and earth. Thus, the body became not only an object of art and science, but also a symbol of universal harmony. At a time when scientists turned their eyes to the stars, philosophers reflected on the nature of man, and artists sought ideal forms. The call of distant wanderings beckoned seafarers. The great geographical discoveries of the 15th and 16th centuries became a natural continuation of the Renaissance spirit, its unquenchable thirst for knowledge and desire to expand horizons. The discovery of new lands became as important as the discovery of new horizons in the inner world of man. In an era when humanism revealed the greatness of the human personality, anatomy explored the secrets of the body, and science penetrated the vast expanses of the universe, sea voyages revealed the earth in all its grandeur and diversity. Unknown lands with mountains, forests, outlandish animals, and peoples whose languages and customs seemed to be the product of fantasy appeared before the eyes of Europeans. It was not just an update of geographical maps, but a complete transformation of worldview. What drew seafarers to distant lands? Many factors were intertwined. Economic motives, such as the growing European demand for spices, silks, and precious metals. Political ambitions of Christian states seeking new trade routes bypassing Muslim territories. Technological progress, which made it possible to build more reliable ships and use navigational instruments, such as the compass and accurate maps. However, in addition to these pragmatic considerations, there was also an unquenchable thirst for knowledge, a desire to go beyond the familiar world. It was this passion for the unknown that filled the sails of European caravels with a fair wind. Christopher Columbus, a Genoese serving the Spanish crown, set out to the west in 1482, driven by the belief that he could reach India by circumnavigating the globe. And although he was not the first to share this idea, it was he who was destined to make a voyage that changed the course of world history. Columbus did not reach India, but discovered the New World, although he did not realize it until the end of his days. His ships, Santa Maria, Pinta, and Nina, became symbols of the era of great geographical discoveries, and his name is forever inscribed in the annals of history. Columbus's voyages marked the beginning of contact between the Old and New Worlds, a contact that proved painful and dramatic. For Europe, this became an era of new opportunities. For the indigenous peoples of America, a catastrophe. However, from a historical perspective, this was the moment when the world first became truly global, when the boundaries between civilizations began to blur, and humanity realized its interconnectedness. Amerigo Vespucci, how the name New World appeared. In the era of great geographical discoveries, when European seafarers plowed the oceans, the figure of Amerigo Vespucci occupies a special place. He was the first to realize that the lands discovered by Christopher Columbus were not the eastern edge of Asia, but a completely new, previously unknown continent. Vespucci, an outstanding explorer and humanist, carefully explored the coast of South America, studied the stars of the southern hemisphere, and made contact with indigenous peoples. In his letters to European intellectuals, he shared his impressions, marveling at the uniqueness of the discovered lands. Everything here appears in a different light. Even the celestial vault seems different. It was thanks to these letters, full of wonder and admiration, that the new continent was named America in honor of Amerigo Vespucci. This is truly a unique case in history when not a conqueror or ruler, but a humanist, thanks to his observations and reflections, was honored to give his name to an entire world. Ferdinand Magellan and the circumnavigation, the Earth as a single whole. In 1519, the Portuguese navigator Ferdinand Magellan, who was in the service of the Spanish crown, led an expedition that was destined to make the first circumnavigation of the world in history. It was an incredibly difficult and dangerous undertaking, full of trials, mutinies, hunger, storms, and tragic losses. Magellan himself died in battle in the Philippines, not reaching the end of his heroic journey. However, one of the expedition's ships, the Victoria, under the command of Juan Sebastian Elcano, managed to return to Europe in 1502, thus completing the first circumnavigation of the world. This event became irrefutable proof of the spherical shape of the Earth and its immense size. The world ceased to be a mosaic of disparate parts. It appeared as a single whole, connected by ocean routes and common horizons. The age of great geographical discoveries transformed not only the map of the world, but also the very way of perceiving space and humanity. Cartography, like a phoenix, rose from the ashes of outdated ideas, where Jerusalem proudly sat in the center of the universe, and mythical islands and monsters inhabited unexplored lands. They were replaced by scientific methods and the painstaking work of such outstanding cartographers as Mercator, Fra Mauro, and Waldseemüller, whose works made it possible to create a more accurate and realistic image of the globe. The world, previously shrouded in a fog of uncertainty with blurred boundaries and legendary creatures, began to acquire clear outlines, amenable to measurement and understanding. These changes affected not only navigation, but also fundamentally influenced people's thinking. The meeting of different cultures and the clash with the other led to discoveries not only geographical, but also anthropological. Europeans, who had previously been unaware of the existence of peoples so different from them, were amazed by the diversity of languages, beliefs, clothing, and appearance. This meeting gave rise to a complex palette of feelings, from admiration and curiosity to fear and cruelty. Some saw strangers as savages, devoid of civilization, while others, on the contrary, admired their closeness to nature and the simplicity of life. Fundamental questions arose about the nature of man, the existence of universal values, and the place of each nation in the world community. It was during this period that humanists began to reflect not only on man as the center of the universe, but also on the incredible diversity of human forms, customs, and ways of life, which became the first step towards the formation of a global view of humanity. In the age of great geographical discoveries, the driving force of Europeans was not only the thirst for profit and the spread of faith, but also an unquenchable need to know the world. Gold, pepper, and missionary activity served as catalysts for large-scale expeditions in which merchants, soldiers, and preachers rushed to unexplored lands. However, behind the brilliance of discoveries lay the dark reality of colonization, accompanied by the destruction of original cultures, forced conversion to Christianity, bloody wars, and the enslavement of indigenous peoples. The Renaissance, which glorified the greatness of the human spirit, also exposed the dark sides of human nature, such as greed, arrogance, and cruelty. Nevertheless, history does not tolerate unambiguity. Along with violence and destruction, Europeans brought valuable knowledge to new lands, introducing the world to previously unseen plants, animals, languages, metals, and medicines. The world became more complex and amazing, revealing its countless facets. The age of great geographical discoveries is not only a period of exploration of new territories, but also a deep metaphor for inner journey. Like a ship leaving its native harbor and setting off into uncharted waters, the man of the Renaissance goes beyond the familiar, rushing into the world of knowledge, feelings, and discoveries. Travel becomes a state of mind, an unquenchable desire to know what lies beyond the horizon, and a search for the meaning of life, even if the path to it lies through raging storms. The Earth, like a living organism, has simultaneously expanded in knowledge and contracted in perception, revealing new horizons to the world. After epoch-making discoveries, the world map was transformed, increasing in size, but the world itself seemed closer and more accessible. Oceans, once seen as boundless barriers, have become connecting routes, uniting continents. Peoples hidden in remote corners of the planet have become neighbors, sharing a common space. Humankind, previously confined to the boundaries of their valley, realized they were citizens of the earth, part of a global community. The Renaissance awakened a sense of self-worth in people, teaching them to value their individuality and potential. The great geographical discoveries, in turn, expanded the horizons of consciousness, teaching respect and appreciation for others, different people living in other cultures and traditions. There is a deep interrelationship and unity of these two great phenomena. Chapter 9 is dedicated to the women of the Renaissance, these inspiring muses and wise rulers. They corresponded, composed poetry, raised children, and patronized the arts. Their voices may not have been loud, but their influence is felt to this day. Their images, captured in works of art and historical chronicles, continue to shine through the centuries, reminding us of the strength and beauty of the female spirit. When it comes to the Renaissance, the names of outstanding men come to mind: philosophers, artists, patrons, kings, Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Copernicus, Galileo, Medici. However, behind these great figures stood other figures, no less profound and significant, although less often mentioned in historical works. These were the women of the Renaissance. Despite the fact that in those days women's rights were significantly limited and access to education and power remained closed to most, the Renaissance still created a unique window of opportunity through which the female mind, talent, and influence could break through. Women wrote books, participated in philosophical debates, ruled states, inspired creators, and lived full, rich lives, contrary to established traditions and prejudices. This chapter is dedicated to them, those who awakened beauty, nurtured minds, ruled courts, composed poetry, and were simply human beings in a world that was just beginning to recognize that a woman is also a human being, possessing reason, feelings, and the right to self-realization. Isabella d'Este, the embodiment of Renaissance femininity. If the Renaissance spoke in a woman's voice, it would probably be the voice of Isabella d'Este. Marchioness of Mantua, stateswoman, patron of the arts, intellectual, and trendsetter, she was an example of female power at court. Corresponding with Leonardo da Vinci himself, inspiring painters and supporting humanists, she became a true symbol of the era. Passionate about collecting antique statues, commissioning portraits, and creating a unique cabinet of curiosities, she transformed her court into a thriving cultural center. It is not surprising that she was called La Prima Donna del Mondo, the First Lady of the World. Isabella not only ruled the state when her husband was absent or after his death, she shaped the ideal of the Renaissance woman, educated, independent, refined, and powerful, but without losing her femininity. Lucrezia Borgia, through the veil of myths to reality. The name Lucrezia Borgia is still surrounded by dark legends of poisoning, treacherous intrigues, and scandalous family secrets. However, behind these myths lies a real woman, educated, refined, well-read, and sincerely loving art. As the daughter of Pope Alexander VI, she was married 3 times for political reasons, but in her later years, she proved herself to be a wise ruler of the Duchy of Ferrara. Under her patronage, the court flourished. She supported poets, musicians, and philosophers, founded monasteries, cared for the needy, and welcomed intellectuals. Her personality intertwined the tragedy of fate and the greatness of spirit, reflecting the complex female fate in an era of great change. Caterina Sforza, heiress of military valor. Among the outstanding personalities of the Renaissance, Caterina Sforza, Countess of Forlì, and Imola, a ruler famous for her fearlessness and strategic thinking, stands out. history has preserved an episode when, finding herself in a besieged castle and facing the threat of reprisals against her children, Katerina, full of determination, went to the fortress wall and, addressing the enemies, declared that she always had the opportunity to produce new heirs. This moment became a symbol of her unbending will. Katerina Sforza not only waged wars and made alliances, but also showed herself in various fields, from military affairs to medicine and alchemy. She was a woman equally skilled with the sword and the pen, an embodiment of strength and an active participant in political life. Christine de Pizan, defender of the female mind. Christine de Pizan, a precursor to the Renaissance, presents a completely different image, her work anticipating its ideas. This French woman of Italian origin became the first woman in Europe to make literary work her source of income. In her famous work, The Book of the City of Ladies, she celebrated the achievements of outstanding women of the past, defended the need for women's education, and refuted the misogynistic views prevalent among philosophers of the time. Christine dreamed of a world where women could realize their intellectual potential and be recognized as individuals, not just as ornaments of society. Her aspiration was not to destroy the existing order, but to expand its boundaries to include the female mind and voice. Sophonisba Anguissola, an artist who defied the era. Art for centuries, the domain of men, reluctantly allowed women to create, assigning them the role of muse, not creator. However, history knows bright exceptions, and one of the most notable is the life and work of Sophonisba Anguissola, an outstanding artist of the 16th century. She not only wielded the brush, but also held the honorary position of court portrait painter to the Spanish queen. Her works were distinguished by rare subtlety, deep feeling, and close attention to the details of the human face. Anguissola's self-portraits, executed with boldness and tenderness at the same time, radiate inner dignity. The artist's talent was recognized by Michelangelo himself. Sophonisba lived a long, full life, remaining true to her vocation until old age. Women, humanists, and scholars, an intellectual breakthrough. Alongside the artists, the Renaissance saw women who devoted themselves to the study of Latin, Greek, and philosophy. Cassandra Fedele, Laura Serreta, Olympia Murata. These names became symbols of intellectual breakthrough. They conducted lively correspondence, gave speeches, commented on ancient texts, participated in discussions, taught, and inspired by their example. Although their names were not widely known to the public, they were respected in academic circles and secular salons. In an era when access to education for women was extremely limited, these outstanding individuals became bold shoots that broke through the thick layer of prejudice. The image of woman in art, from muse to symbol. In Renaissance painting, special attention is paid to female images. Raphael's Madonnas, Botticelli's Venuses, portraits of ladies with books, pets, and flowers, all of them are endowed with a bright individuality. Their faces reveal inner life, dignity, and clarity of thought. Woman ceases to be merely an object of admiration, transforming into a symbol of harmony, wisdom, and peace of mind. In the female image, artists sought answers to eternal questions about the nature of love, beauty, and the meaning of human existence. During the Renaissance, millions of women, whether mothers, daughters, wives, or simply heroines of their time, made daily contributions to the development of society. Not all of them belonged to noble families or were widely known, but their role in the lives of families and society was invaluable. They raised children, practiced medicine, sang, engaged in needlework, offered prayers, corresponded, traded, showed love and mercy. And although their names are not immortalized on the pages of history textbooks, their numbers significantly exceeded the number of artists and poets of that era. With their everyday lives, they tirelessly moved the Renaissance forward, remaining invisible architects of time. As the 10th chapter dedicated to the decline of the Renaissance and the harbinger of the Reformation states, everything beautiful is destined to have a limit, and this is not due to its weakness, but rather to its living nature. Like everything alive, the Renaissance traveled its path. It breathed, grew, blossomed, and finally, wearily closed its eyes. By the 16th century, the Renaissance had reached its peak. European culture was experiencing an unprecedented flowering, and cities were being transformed by magnificent palaces and works of art. Human thought sought to comprehend the laws of the universe, and science laid the foundation for future revolutionary discoveries. Humanistic ideas radically changed the perception of man. It seemed that everything around was filled with fullness and confidence. However, just as in the height of summer, the night wind brings the first feeling of autumn, so in the period of the Renaissance's flowering, signs of its completion began to appear. This was not a sudden break or fall, but rather a long, complex, and multifaceted sunset in which greatness, doubt, pain, and insight were intertwined. The era of religious storms, when the foundation of truth cracks. In the distant year of 1510, in the quiet German town of Wittenberg, a monk named Martin Luther committed an act that would forever change the course of history. He nailed to the gates of the local church a sheet containing 95 theses, in which he boldly opposed the widespread practice of selling indulgences. But behind this seemingly theological dispute lay something more profound. Luther dared to challenge the Catholic Church's very monopoly on truth. What began as an academic discussion quickly ignited into a raging fire that swept across Europe. The Reformation, as this movement was called, led to the emergence of numerous Protestant churches, bloody religious wars, fierce persecutions, the destruction of books, and the creation of new translations of the Bible. It granted people the long-awaited freedom to think differently, but simultaneously deprived Europe of the very spiritual integrity that the Renaissance era had cherished. The dream of universal harmony began to crack deeply. Intellectuals, artists, and scientists found themselves in a difficult position, torn between two worlds, the world of reason and the world of faith, the world of inner freedom and the world of external dogma. An era of choice began, which often led to internal discord and mental anguish. The crisis of humanism, when man confronts man. Humanism, with its lofty notion of the dignity of each individual, celebrated the greatness of man. But what happens when two individuals are side by side, each with their own truth, their own unique view of the world, and both endowed with free will? The answer to this question was the devastating religious wars that erupted in Europe between Catholics and Protestants, between supporters of the old faith and the new reformers. Freedom of thought exposed the deep contradictions of human nature. It turned out that not everyone was ready to live in a world where there was a diversity of opinions and beliefs. The ideas of the humanists did not disappear without a trace, but they lost their dominant position in society. They were replaced by fierce disputes, ideological polarization, and increased control by the state and the church. The world no longer believed in simple and clear harmony. It entered an era of uncertainty and change. The gap between creativity and political leadership is becoming increasingly apparent. In the early Renaissance, an artist appeared as a thinker, a member of society, almost as a predictor of the future. However, by the 16th century, the artist's position had changed. He becomes a courtier, a performer of commissions, a part of the approved culture. Patronage of the arts becomes a means of achieving political goals. Art loses its authenticity, disappearing into splendor, pomposity, and golden glitter. The lively and exciting painting of Leonardo da Vinci is replaced by the monumentality of Titian, the solemnity of portraits, and decorativeness. The artist continues to create works, but more and more often on commission, within certain limits and with an eye to approval. This is how the Baroque is born, where light breaks down into many shadows. The cultural language is also undergoing changes. The harmonious clarity of the Renaissance is replaced by the Baroque, a style full of passion, curved lines, light and shadow. This is no longer a song of dawn, but a melody of a restless noon. Paintings depict scenes of martyrdom. The heavens are pierced by bright light. Emotions become exaggerated, and space becomes unstable. Music becomes expressive, and architecture becomes theatrical. The Baroque is a reflection of a divided world, where they no longer strive for balance, but challenge it. A shift in priorities is taking place in the scientific world. Scrupulousness takes the place of aesthetics. Science, whose roots lie in the creative workshops of artists and philosophical circles of the 15th and 16th centuries, begins its separate path of development. It departs from the ideal of Leonardo da Vinci, who embodied the universal genius, and increasingly leans towards dispassionate analysis, strict mathematical calculations, and careful observation of phenomena. Presumptive reasoning is replaced by precise mathematical methods and strict logic. New outstanding personalities appear on the historical arena, such as Descartes, Kepler, and Newton. Their work focuses not on admiring the beauty of the universe, but on finding exact formulas, not on harmony, but on identifying strict patterns. Man ceases to be perceived as a microcosm, and the universe appears as a complex mechanism. This is not a sign of decline, but rather a natural stage in the development of science. However, at this stage, less attention is paid to the poetic perception of the world and more to the practical application of knowledge to manage reality. Political processes are characterized by the centralization of power and the decline of republican ideals. The city-states of Florence, Mantua, and Siena, once the cradle of the Renaissance, lose their independence and are absorbed by larger monarchies with centralized governance. Sophisticated patrons are replaced by cardinal kings and state administrators. Art and philosophy become part of the state system, and freedom of thought is subject to control. Instead of a vibrant array of independent cities, uniformity reigns, a vertical power structure is established, and total control over the intellectual sphere is exercised. Has the Renaissance era concluded, or has it merely transformed? Undoubtedly, the Renaissance as a historical period has come to an end. However, the truth is much deeper and more multifaceted. It has not simply faded away, but has been reborn, giving rise to new trends and ideas. The belief in reason, characteristic of the Enlightenment, the revolutionary aspirations for freedom, the scientific progress with its rigorous methods, the humanistic principles of human rights, and the art that preserves the memory of Raphael, Leonardo da Vinci, and Botticelli. All of this is a direct legacy of the Renaissance. The decline of this era was not an end, but rather a scattering of its light into many rays, each of which continued to illuminate the path of humanity. Time is relentless, and nothing lasts forever under the moon. However, not everything disappears without a trace. The Renaissance era has ended, but its echoes are still felt in our culture and consciousness. It has left an indelible mark, like the light of a distant star that continues to reach Earth, even though the star itself has long since faded. The Renaissance has become an integral part of our thinking, feelings, beliefs, and dreams. Modern man no longer lives in the luxurious marble palaces of Florence, exchanges letters in Latin, wears velvet clothes, or commissions frescoes to decorate domes. Nevertheless, we live in a world that was built on the foundation laid in the Renaissance era. We believe in the value of human reason and the necessity of knowledge, in the importance of beauty and harmony, in the unity of spirit and body, in the fact that truth is not a ready-made gift, but the result of a continuous search. We are convinced that every person is capable and should think, feel, and create. The Renaissance is not just a look into the past, it is a daring leap into the future, a proclamation of a new era where man, emerging from the darkness of the Middle Ages, boldly declares himself, "I exist, I think, I feel, I strive for knowledge." In the canvases of the masters of that era, we see not just portraits, but a silent yet profound conviction that man is not a regrettable oversight of the universe, but its highest achievement, the crown of creation. In the books of that time, not only sets of symbols are hidden, but also cherished dreams of the triumph of reason, of the reign of justice, and of the achievement of absolute clarity of thought. The geographical maps of the Renaissance are not just diagrams of the Earth's surface, they are a sincere hope that beyond the horizon lie lands where there will be a place for every seeker. Perhaps there is no need to literally return to the 15th century, but it is certainly worth occasionally remembering those great discoveries that were made in the Renaissance era. The radiance of reason, the inviolability of human dignity, and the boundless value of every life lived. May this light continue to softly illuminate your inner world. May it become that quiet but unquenchable light that leads through the darkness of night, through the thorns of doubt, and through the exhausting fatigue. Allow yourself a respite, immerse yourself in sleep, but let this important feeling remain somewhere deep in your consciousness. To live is to constantly move forward, to seek new paths, to listen carefully to the world, to make discoveries, and to constantly be reborn. Good day to you. Thank you for your attention. I sincerely hope that no annoying inaccuracies arose in my narrative. After all, even the most diligent storyteller, passionate about his work, can sometimes stumble in word.